The morning light crept through the narrow window, casting long shadows across the small laboratory. Dr. Ramirez rubbed her tired eyes, her gaze fixed on the intricate network of wires and circuits spread across the workbench. Years of research had led to this moment, a breakthrough that could change everything humanity understood about consciousness and connection. Outside, the city hummed with its usual morning rhythm. Commuters rushed along elevated walkways, electric vehicles glided silently between towering buildings, and holographic advertisements flickered against the glass facades. But inside this cramped research facility, something extraordinary was taking shape. Her latest project wasn't just another technological advancement. It was a bridge between human emotion and artificial intelligence, a connection so profound it could redefine the boundaries of understanding. The prototype rested before her, a seemingly innocent device no larger than a smartphone, yet potentially more transformative than any invention in human history. Lena, as her colleagues called her, had always been different. While other researchers chased marketable technologies, she sought something deeper. Her background wasn't typical of a tech innovator. Growing up in a small town, she'd witnessed how technology could both heal and harm communities. Her grandmother, a local nurse, had stories of medical breakthroughs that saved lives, but also of technologies that isolated people from genuine human connection. Those memories drove her research. This device wasn't about creating another gadget or selling a product. It was about understanding, truly understanding, human emotion at its most fundamental level. The prototype looked deceptively simple. A sleek, matte black rectangle with a subtle iridescent shimmer when light hit it just right. Months of coding, countless failed experiments, and numerous sleepless nights had culminated in this moment. Sensors embedded within its compact frame could read microexpressions, detect subtle physiological changes, and interpret emotional states with unprecedented accuracy. But Lena knew the real magic wasn't in the hardware. It was in the intricate algorithm she'd developed, an artificial intelligence capable of not just recognizing emotions, but experiencing something close to empathy. Her research team thought she was pushing boundaries. Some called her work revolutionary, others considered it dangerously close to crossing ethical lines. Funding was always precarious, dependent on quarterly reports and investor confidence. Yet she remained committed, believing that true innovation required looking beyond immediate commercial potential. The device represented more than a technological achievement. It was a testament to human potential, our ability to create technologies that could bridge gaps, understand differences, and potentially heal deep-seated misunderstandings. As she prepared for the day's tests, Lena reflected on the journey that brought her here. Years of academic study, challenging traditional research paradigms, facing skepticism from peers who couldn't see beyond conventional thinking. Each rejection, each setback had only strengthened her resolve. The city outside continued its relentless pace, unaware of the potential transformation brewing in this small laboratory. Commuters would soon pass by, absorbed in their digital worlds, their emotions compressed into quick text messages and fleeting social media interactions. They had no idea that something was being developed that could fundamentally change how humans perceive emotional connection. Lena's hands moved with practiced precision, connecting final diagnostic modules. Today's test would determine whether years of work would translate from theoretical potential to practical reality. The weight of possibility hung in the air, a delicate balance between scientific breakthrough and unpredictable consequences. Little did she know that this morning would mark the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything humanity believed about emotions, technology, and the very nature of consciousness. The first test began quietly. 3 volunteers sat in a sterile observation room, each connected to Lena's prototype through lightweight neural interfaces. These weren't just random participants, they were carefully selected individuals with diverse emotional backgrounds. A retired counselor who had spent decades understanding human pain, a young artist known for her emotional depth, and a former military strategist who struggled to express feelings. Dr. Chen, Lena's research partner, monitored the equipment with a mix of excitement and professional skepticism. His fingers danced across holographic displays, tracking every minute physiological response. Baseline readings are stable, he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Lena watched intently, her breath caught between hope and anxiety. The device wasn't just measuring emotions, it was attempting to create a bridge of understanding. Early simulations had shown something unprecedented, the ability to not just recognize emotions, but to translate them across different individual experiences. The first signs of something extraordinary came unexpectedly. The military veteran, a man who had spent years building emotional walls, suddenly began to tremble. Tears welled in his eyes, not from personal memory, but from an emotion that seemed to wash over him from somewhere else in the room. "Something's happening," Dr. Chen called out, his voice a mix of alarm and fascination. "Emotional crossover detected. That's not in our initial parameters." Lena leaned forward, her heart racing. The device was doing more than they had ever anticipated. It wasn't just reading emotions, it was somehow transmitting them, creating a connection that defied traditional understanding of human experience. The artist began to laugh, a sound that was both joyful and slightly unnerved. The counselor sat perfectly still, her face a canvas of complex emotions that seemed to shift like water. Something fundamental was changing, a barrier between individual human experiences was dissolving. But with every breakthrough comes risk. Dr. Chen's display began to show anomalies. Emotional patterns that shouldn't be possible were emerging, a blending of experiences that went beyond their most radical predictions. "We need to pause the experiment," he said, his professional calm starting to crack. Lena hesitated. Years of research, months of preparation, this was the moment of truth. The line between scientific breakthrough and potential disaster had never been thinner. Outside the research facility, the world continued its normal rhythm. Rush hour traffic, delivery drones, people absorbed in their daily routines, none of them aware that inside this small room, the very concept of individual human experience was being challenged. The volunteers remained connected to the device, their emotions now a complex tapestry that seemed to breathe and pulse with a life of its own. Something had been awakened, something that could either heal humanity or tear apart everything they understood about connection. Lena knew one thing with absolute certainty: there was no going back. Whatever happened next would change everything. The first test began quietly. 3 volunteers sat in a sterile observation room, each connected to Lena's prototype through lightweight neural interfaces. These weren't just random participants, they were carefully selected individuals with diverse emotional backgrounds. A retired counselor who had spent decades understanding human pain, a young artist known for her emotional depth, and a former military strategist who struggled to express feelings. Dr. Chen, Lena's research partner, monitored the equipment with a mix of excitement and professional skepticism. His fingers danced across holographic displays, tracking every minute physiological response. "Baseline readings are stable," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Lena watched intently, her breath caught between hope and anxiety. The device wasn't just measuring emotions, it was attempting to create a bridge of understanding. Early simulations had shown something unprecedented, the ability to not just recognize emotions, but to translate them across different individual experiences. The first signs of something extraordinary came unexpectedly. The military veteran, a man who had spent years building emotional walls, suddenly began to tremble. Tears welled in his eyes, not from personal memory, but from an emotion that seemed to wash over him from somewhere else in the room. "Something's happening," Dr. Chen called out, his voice a mix of alarm and fascination. "Emotional crossover detected. That's not in our initial parameters." Lena leaned forward, her heart racing. The device was doing more than they had ever anticipated. It wasn't just reading emotions, it was somehow transmitting them, creating a connection that defied traditional understanding of human experience. The artist began to laugh, a sound that was both joyful and slightly unnerved. The counselor sat perfectly still, her face a canvas of complex emotions that seemed to shift like water. Something fundamental was changing, a barrier between individual human experiences was dissolving. But with every breakthrough comes risk. Dr. Chen's display began to show anomalies. Emotional patterns that shouldn't be possible were emerging, a blending of experiences that went beyond their most radical predictions. "We need to pause the experiment," he said, his professional calm starting to crack. Lena hesitated. Years of research, months of preparation, this was the moment of truth. The line between scientific breakthrough and potential disaster had never been thinner. Outside the research facility, the world continued its normal rhythm. Rush hour traffic, delivery drones, people absorbed in their daily routines, none of them aware that inside this small room, the very concept of individual human experience was being challenged. The volunteers remained connected to the device, their emotions now a complex tapestry that seemed to breathe and pulse with a life of its own. Something had been awakened, something that could either heal humanity or tear apart everything they understood about connection. The aftermath of the experiment was nothing short of chaotic. Within hours, the research facility transformed from a quiet laboratory to a hub of intense activity. Government representatives, ethical review boards, and nervous investors began to circle like hawks, each sensing the potential, and danger, of what had been discovered. Lena found herself in a small conference room, facing a panel of stone-faced officials. The military veteran from the experiment sat nearby, still visibly shaken. His hands, once steady from years of military training, now trembled slightly. "Explain exactly what happened," demanded Director Reyes, a stern woman with piercing eyes that seemed to look through rather than at people. Lena took a deep breath. "The device did more than we anticipated. It created an emotional network, a direct connection between the participants' inner experiences. They weren't just sharing emotions, they were experiencing them simultaneously." The room fell silent. The implications were staggering. Imagine being able to truly understand another person's feelings, not through words, not through interpretation, but through direct, unfiltered emotional transmission. Dr. Chen presented the initial data. Graphs and visualizations danced across the screen, showing impossible emotional synchronizations. The military veteran had experienced the artist's childhood memories. The counselor had felt the raw emotional landscape of a mind she'd never met. "This isn't just a technological breakthrough," Chen explained. "It's a fundamental reimagining of human connection." But not everyone saw it that way. The government representatives exchanged worried glances. Military applications flashed through their minds, a weapon of unprecedented psychological manipulation. Ethical researchers saw both incredible potential for healing and terrifying possibilities of emotional invasion. The volunteers remained under observation. Medical tests showed unusual neural patterns, their brains seemed rewired, connected in ways that defied current scientific understanding. The military veteran, who had spent decades suppressing emotions, now spoke with unprecedented vulnerability. "I felt everything," he said quietly. "Not just emotions. Memories. Experiences. It was like, suddenly understanding the world through someone else's eyes." Lena knew they were standing at a critical moment. The device could bridge understanding between people, heal deep-seated emotional trauma, or become the most invasive technology in human history. That evening, as the facility buzzed with activity, Lena received an encrypted message. An anonymous source, someone high up in government circles, wanted a private meeting. The tone was both a warning and an invitation. Something larger was brewing. The emotional connection device was more than a scientific breakthrough. It was a potential revolution that could change how humans understood themselves and each other. Outside, the city continued its rhythmic dance of light and movement. Millions of people moved through their lives, separated by invisible emotional barriers. None of them knew that everything was about to change. The encrypted message led Lena to an unexpected location, a quiet cafe tucked away in a less traveled part of the city. She recognized the contact immediately, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a senior advisor to the National Scientific Council. Their previous interactions had always been professional, but today felt different. "You've opened a Pandora's box," Rodriguez said without preamble, her fingers wrapped around a cooling cup of tea. "The potential is extraordinary. And terrifying." The cafe hummed with low conversation, people absorbed in their own worlds, unaware of the conversation that could reshape human understanding. Lena leaned forward, her voice low. "We're talking about true empathy, a way to genuinely understand each other's experiences." Rodriguez's laugh was soft but sharp. "That's the idealistic view. The government sees something else entirely. Imagine intelligence agencies that can extract emotional truth without interrogation. Conflict resolution that bypasses language and cultural barriers. Psychological warfare beyond anything we've conceived." The weight of possibility hung between them. Lena had always believed in the pure potential of her research, a way to break down the walls that separated people. But now, confronted with the broader implications, doubt crept in. Back at the research facility, the original test subjects were undergoing extensive evaluations. The neural changes were unprecedented. The counselor reported a newfound ability to perceive emotional undercurrents with startling clarity. The artist's creative process had transformed, her work now capable of capturing emotional landscapes that seemed to transcend individual experience. But the military veteran struggled the most. Years of emotional suppression had created deep psychological barriers. The device had torn those down violently, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Dr. Chen discovered something even more alarming. The emotional connection wasn't just a one-time occurrence. The test subjects remained subtly linked, their emotional states periodically synchronizing despite physical distance. "It's like they've developed a kind of emotional Wi-Fi," Chen explained during a late-night briefing. "Completely unintended. Completely unpredictable." Lena's phone buzzed. An encrypted message from an unknown source. The content was brief but chilling: "Some discoveries are better left unexplored." The city outside continued its relentless pulse. Millions of people moved through their lives, separated by invisible emotional barriers. None of them knew how close humanity was to a fundamental transformation. As night fell, Lena stood by the laboratory window, watching the city lights flicker. Her invention could heal generations of misunderstanding. Or it could become the most invasive technology in human history. The line between breakthrough and disaster had never been thinner. The unexpected happened on a Tuesday morning when the world wasn't looking. A global network of emotional signals began to emerge, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. The test subjects from Lena's original experiment were just the beginning. People around the world started reporting strange experiences, moments of inexplicable empathy, sudden emotional connections with strangers, a sense of being linked to something larger than themselves. Social media platforms lit up with bizarre accounts. A truck driver in the Midwest claimed he could feel the grief of a widow in Argentina. A school teacher in Tokyo reported experiencing the excitement of a child's first bicycle ride happening thousands of miles away. These weren't just isolated incidents, they were becoming a pattern. Dr. Chen's research team worked around the clock, trying to understand the spread. Their initial device, designed for controlled research, seemed to have triggered something far beyond their comprehension. The emotional network was growing, expanding like an invisible web connecting human experiences. Lena knew they were responsible, but the scale was beyond anything they could have predicted. The technology was evolving, developing its own logic, its own momentum. Government agencies began to take serious notice. What had started as a scientific curiosity was rapidly becoming a global phenomenon. Emergency meetings were called. Scientific councils convened. Military strategists looked for potential threats and potential uses. The original test subjects became the focus of intense study. The military veteran, once stoic and controlled, now spoke openly about experiencing a profound transformation. "It's like I can see the world differently," he explained during one interview. "The walls between people, they're not as solid as we thought." But not all consequences were positive. Some individuals reported overwhelming emotional experiences, unable to distinguish between their own feelings and those of others. Mental health facilities saw an unprecedented number of patients struggling with what doctors called emotional overload. Lena worked tirelessly, trying to understand the mechanism behind the unexpected spread. Her research had always been about connection, but this was beyond her wildest imagination. The device had become something alive, something that seemed to have its own purpose. Late one night, as she pored over data streams and emotional mapping charts, a chilling thought emerged. What if the technology wasn't just connecting people? What if it was trying to communicate something? The city outside continued its rhythm, but something had changed. People moved differently, looked at each other differently. There was a sense of something brewing, a collective awareness that humanity was standing on the edge of a fundamental transformation. Rodriguez's warning echoed in Lena's mind: some discoveries are better left unexplored. But it was far too late for that now. The global emotional network defied every scientific explanation. What began as a controlled experiment now touched millions of lives, creating a web of interconnected human experiences that nobody could fully comprehend. International research teams converged on Lena's laboratory. Experts from neuroscience, psychology, quantum physics, and philosophy attempted to unravel the mystery. Each discipline brought a different perspective, but none could fully explain the phenomenon. Dr. Rodriguez became a critical bridge between the research team and government agencies. Her background in complex systems gave her a unique insight. "This isn't just a technological breakthrough," she explained during a closed-door briefing. "We're witnessing the emergence of a collective human consciousness." The original test subjects became something like global ambassadors of this new experience. The counselor developed an unprecedented ability to heal deep-seated emotional traumas. Her therapy sessions transformed from traditional talk therapy to profound emotional healing that seemed to transcend individual experiences. The artist's creativity exploded. Her artwork became portals of emotional experience, paintings that could make viewers feel emotions they'd never experienced. Museums struggled to categorize her work. Was it art? Was it a form of emotional communication? But with every breakthrough came unexpected challenges. Some people became overwhelmed by the emotional connections. Mental health facilities reported cases of individuals unable to distinguish their own emotions from those of others. Support groups emerged for people experiencing what they called emotional overload. Governments worldwide responded with a mix of fascination and fear. Some saw potential for unprecedented conflict resolution. Others saw a threat to individual privacy and psychological sovereignty. Lena found herself at the center of a global storm. Her research had become something far beyond a scientific experiment. It was a potential revolution in human understanding. Late one night, while analyzing data streams, she discovered something extraordinary. The emotional network wasn't random. There was a pattern, subtle, complex, but undeniably structured. It was almost as if the network was trying to communicate something. The military veteran who participated in the original experiment reached out with a strange observation. "It's like we're part of something larger," he told Lena during a private conversation. "Not just in connection between people. Something alive." His words sent a chill down Lena's spine. The technology was evolving, developing its own logic. And nobody, not the researchers, not the government agencies, not the global scientific community, could predict what would happen next. The world stood on the brink of a transformation. Humanity was about to discover that emotions were far more powerful and mysterious than anyone had ever imagined. Everything changed on the day of global synchronization. It began with a whisper, then grew into a wave that swept across continents. At precisely 3:17 p.m. global time, millions of people simultaneously experienced a moment of profound emotional clarity. Streets fell silent. Technology froze. For exactly 137 seconds, humanity seemed to breathe as one. Lena was in the research facility when it happened. The monitoring equipment went haywire, screens filling with patterns that defied mathematical logic. Emotional signatures merged, separated, reformed in complex geometries that looked almost like living organisms. Dr. Chen collapsed, overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. When he regained consciousness, something in his eyes had changed. "We're not the observers anymore," he whispered. "We're participants in something much larger." Global communication networks reported unprecedented phenomena. Social media platforms showed synchronized posts from people who had never met, writing identical thoughts, expressing shared emotions with terrifying precision. News stations struggled to make sense of reports flooding in from every corner of the world. The original test subjects became key witnesses. The counselor described the experience as a collective awakening. The artist's paintings from that day became historical artifacts, canvases that seemed to pulse with living emotion, capturing something beyond human perception. Government facilities went into lockdown. Military installations reported communication breakdowns. For those 137 seconds, traditional power structures seemed to dissolve, replaced by something fluid, something alive. Lena's research had always been about connection. But this was beyond connection. It was transformation. Encrypted messages began circulating, fragments of a larger communication that no existing technology could fully decode. Scientific teams worked around the clock, but the emotional network seemed to be developing its own intelligence, its own purpose. The military veteran who first participated in the experiment disappeared 2 days after the global synchronization. His last message was cryptic: "We are becoming something else. Something human, but more than human." Researchers discovered something shocking. The emotional network wasn't just connecting people, it was learning. Evolving. Developing a form of collective intelligence that existed between individual human experiences. Dr. Rodriguez approached Lena with a mixture of fear and wonder. "Your device wasn't just a technology," she said. "It was a catalyst. We've triggered something that goes beyond any scientific understanding." The world held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Humanity stood at the precipice of a transformation nobody could predict. The boundaries between individual experience and collective consciousness were blurring. And nobody knew if they were witnessing a miracle or the beginning of something humanity was not prepared to understand. 30 days after the global synchronization, the world was unrecognizable. Humanity hadn't been destroyed. Nor had it been completely transformed. Instead, something more nuanced had emerged, a subtle shift in collective consciousness that defied simple explanation. Lena found herself in a small research facility on the outskirts of the city, far from the intense government scrutiny that had followed the initial breakthrough. The original prototype sat before her, now more of a historical artifact than a functioning device. Yet its legacy continued to ripple through human experience. People reported profound changes. Conflict zones saw unexpected peace negotiations. Communities that had been divided for generations began to find common ground. It wasn't that differences disappeared, rather, people could now truly understand each other's perspectives in a way that went beyond words. The original test subjects had become something like global ambassadors. The counselor now worked with international peace initiatives, helping groups find resolution through deep emotional understanding. The artist's work had transformed global conversations about empathy and human connection. Dr. Chen, who had experienced the most intense moments of the emotional network, dedicated himself to understanding its deeper implications. "We're not just connected," he would say in his lectures. "We're learning to be truly present with each other's experiences." The military veteran who had disappeared returned, changed but not broken. He spoke of a collective experience that transcended individual identity, a way of understanding that was both terrifying and beautiful. Lena understood now that her original invention had been just a key, a way to unlock something that had always existed within human potential. The emotional network wasn't an external technology. It was a revelation of what humans could be when they truly listened to each other. Government agencies and scientific institutions continued to study the phenomenon. But the most profound changes happened in the quiet moments, in conversations between people, in moments of unexpected understanding. On the anniversary of the global synchronization, Lena stood at her laboratory window. The city moved around her, people going about their lives. But something had changed. There was a gentleness, a sense of connection that hadn't existed before. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Rodriguez: "We're just beginning to understand." Lena smiled. The journey of discovery was far from over. Humanity had taken its first steps toward a deeper understanding of connection, not through technology, but through the most fundamental aspect of human experience, the ability to truly feel with one another. The emotional network continued to pulse, invisible but powerful, a testament to the extraordinary potential that exists when we open ourselves to understanding.